The rain fell hard that night, painting the city in a mix of silver and shadow. The streets were quiet, except for the soft sound of water splashing under the shoes of people hurrying home. Among them was Ryan Carter, a young office employee at Bluebridge Corporation. His shoulders were heavy with tiredness, his mind full of numbers and unfinished reports. He was used to long days and lonely nights. The world around him moved fast, but his life felt slow, like he was walking through the same day again and again. Ryan's umbrella flipped inside out when a strong gust of wind hit. He sighed, pulling his jacket tight and rushing toward a small cafe at the corner. Its lights glowed warmly against the cold night. Just as he reached the cafe's door, his eyes caught something, or rather, someone, sitting near the trash bins under a weak streetlight. It was a woman. Her clothes were torn, her hair wet and tangled. She sat quietly, hugging an old blanket around herself. Her face was partly hidden under the shadows, but her eyes shone with something strange. They weren't empty or lost like most homeless people Ryan had seen before. There was calmness in them, almost pride. For a moment, Ryan forgot about the rain. Something about her made him stop. He looked around. People passed by her without a glance. A few even crossed to the other side of the street. Ryan hesitated. He wasn't the kind of man who liked getting involved in strangers' problems. But something in his chest pushed him forward. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe curiosity. Or maybe the way her eyes seemed to say, "I've seen more than you think." He walked closer, his shoes splashing in puddles. "Excuse me, miss," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you okay? Do you need something to eat?" The woman looked up. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and soft, not what he expected. "I'm fine," she said simply. "But thank you for asking. Not many do." Ryan smiled awkwardly. "It's cold. You shouldn't be out here. There's a cafe right there. Come, I'll get you something warm." For a few seconds, she just stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slightly. Together they walked into the cafe. The warmth hit them instantly. The smell of coffee and baked bread filled the air. The waitress gave them a curious look but said nothing when Ryan ordered 2 cups of hot coffee and a sandwich. They sat at a corner table. The woman kept her hands wrapped around the coffee cup as if it was the first warm thing she had touched in days. "What's your name?" Ryan asked. "Grace," she replied. "That's a beautiful name," he said with a small smile. She looked at him, and for a moment, Ryan thought she smiled too, but it was faint, like a memory of a smile. "And you?" she asked. "Ryan. I work nearby. Just heading home after a long day." Grace nodded slowly, her eyes thoughtful. "Long days can be heavy," she murmured. "But sometimes, heavy days bring people where they need to be." Her words surprised him. She didn't sound like a lost person or someone broken by life. There was strength in her tone, a strange wisdom. "You speak like you've seen a lot," Ryan said. Grace took a sip of her coffee before replying. "You could say that. I've seen the best and the worst of people. Often in the same person." Ryan didn't know what to say. The rain outside grew heavier, and thunder rolled softly in the distance. They sat in silence for a few moments, the kind that feels oddly comfortable. He noticed small details. Her hands were delicate, her nails once manicured, though now chipped and dirty. She didn't fit the picture of someone who had always been on the streets. "Do you have somewhere to go tonight?" he finally asked. Grace shook her head. "No. But don't worry about me, Ryan. I'm where I'm meant to be." Her voice carried a strange confidence, almost like she knew something he didn't. Ryan leaned back, puzzled. "You said you've seen both the best and worst of people. Which one do you think I am?" Grace looked at him directly for the first time. Her eyes were dark and deep, filled with something he couldn't quite name. "You're kind," she said. "But you hide your kindness because you've been hurt before. You think helping others won't change anything. But it will, someday." Ryan blinked, taken aback. How could she know that? He laughed nervously. "You sound like you can read minds." She smiled slightly. "No. Just people." There was a pause. Then she looked out the window, watching the rain fall in sheets. "Do you ever feel like life tests you in strange ways?" she asked softly. "Every day," Ryan admitted. "It feels like no matter how hard I work, I'm invisible." Grace nodded slowly, still looking outside. "Sometimes, the invisible ones are meant to witness what others cannot see." Her words felt heavy, like they meant more than she was saying. Ryan couldn't explain it, but something about her presence felt almost important. Like meeting her wasn't an accident. When the rain finally began to ease, Ryan realized how late it was. The cafe was almost empty. He checked his watch and sighed. "I should go," he said. "You sure you'll be all right?" Grace looked at him again, and this time, her expression softened completely. "You've done more than enough, Ryan. Thank you for the warmth." He stood up and pulled a few dollars from his wallet, leaving them on the table. "At least take this. Get something tomorrow." But before he could walk away, Grace said something that made him freeze in his tracks. "You'll see me again soon, Ryan." He turned around, confused. "What did you say?" Grace was still sitting there, her hands folded neatly on the table, her eyes calm. "You'll see me again soon," she repeated. "When the time is right." Ryan frowned. "But I never told you my name." She only smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that didn't reach her eyes. "No," she said softly. "You didn't." The sound of rain filled the silence between them. Ryan felt a chill run through him. He opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, the lights flickered slightly, and when they steadied, Grace had already stood up and walked out into the night. He rushed to the door, looking down the street, but she was gone. The road was empty, the rain falling gently now like a whisper. Ryan stood there for a long moment, feeling something strange in his chest, a mix of unease and curiosity. He didn't believe in fate or destiny, but something about that woman didn't feel ordinary. Her calm voice, her strange words, the way she knew his name, it all swirled in his mind. When he finally walked home, her words echoed again and again, "You'll see me again soon." That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. The sound of rain tapping against his window felt like a reminder, or maybe a warning. He kept seeing her eyes in his mind, full of secrets and something more. He didn't know then that this simple act of kindness, offering a cup of coffee to a stranger, would change his entire life. Because Grace wasn't who she seemed to be. And the truth waiting ahead would shake everything he thought he knew about compassion, power, and destiny. Outside, the rain stopped. The city lights flickered softly through the mist. Somewhere out there, Grace walked alone under the wet night sky, calm, silent, and waiting for the moment when their paths would cross again. And when they did, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning came with gray skies and a cool breeze that carried the smell of wet streets. Ryan woke up early, but his mind was still trapped in last night's strange meeting. He kept replaying Grace's voice in his head, the calm way she said, "You'll see me again soon, Ryan." He still couldn't figure out how she knew his name. Maybe she heard someone say it at the cafe? Maybe he mentioned it without realizing? But something deep inside told him it wasn't that simple. Ryan shook off the thought, got dressed, and made his way to the office. Bluebridge Corp's tall glass building reflected the dull morning light. Inside, everything was polished, marble floors, busy footsteps, the smell of expensive coffee. His coworkers were already talking excitedly about the upcoming annual office party that night. The office party was a big deal. Everyone tried to look their best, hoping to get noticed by higher management, maybe even by the CEO himself, Mr. Thomas Hale. Ryan never cared much about these events. They felt fake, full of forced smiles and empty compliments. Still, attendance was mandatory. As Ryan reached his desk, his friend Jake rolled his chair over. "Big night, huh? You bringing anyone to the party?" Ryan laughed lightly. "You mean like a date? You know me, Jake. My social life is as empty as my fridge." Jake grinned. "Come on, man. You should invite someone. It's good for the image. The boss likes people who look confident." Ryan shrugged. "I'll think about it." But he didn't think about it for long. As the morning passed, he found himself glancing out the window at the busy street below. His mind wandered back to Grace. Something about her calmness in the rain, her eyes that seemed to know things, wouldn't leave his mind. At lunch, while everyone laughed and talked about what they'd wear to the party, Ryan sat quietly. The image of Grace sitting in the rain kept flashing in his head. He wondered where she was now. Did she find a safe place to sleep? Was she hungry? An hour before the end of his shift, Ryan found himself standing near the same cafe where he had met her. The rain had stopped, and the street glistened under the weak sunlight. He looked around, scanning the sidewalks. For a moment, he thought she wasn't there. Then, near the corner, he saw her, sitting quietly again, this time feeding crumbs to a small pigeon. He hesitated before walking closer. "Grace?" She looked up and smiled faintly. "Hello, Ryan." That same calm voice. That same steady gaze. It almost felt unreal that she remembered him, but somehow, he knew she would. "You're still here," he said gently. "I don't move much," she replied softly. "People move around me instead." Ryan paused. He didn't know what to say to that. She had a strange way of speaking, poetic but sad. Then he remembered the party. The thought came out of nowhere, but once it did, it wouldn't leave. "Grace," he said slowly, "I know this might sound strange, but there's an office event tonight. A party. I was wondering if you'd like to come with me." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "A party?" "Yeah," he said quickly, feeling nervous. It's nothing big. Just my company's annual thing. Everyone's bringing someone, and I thought maybe you'd like to come. Have a warm meal, good music, nice clothes, just for one evening." Grace looked down at the pigeon now resting near her foot. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then she looked back up at him. "Why me, Ryan?" He blinked, unsure how to answer. "Because you deserve to feel normal. To smile. To be around people who don't ignore you." Her eyes softened, but there was a shadow behind them. "You think I want to be around people again?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But maybe you should. Even if it's just for tonight." Grace stared at him for a long time, and he began to think she'd refuse. But then she said, in that quiet, mysterious tone again, "Maybe it's time people saw the truth." Ryan frowned slightly. "What truth?" Grace smiled, a gentle curve of her lips that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll see soon enough." He didn't understand, but he didn't push. "All right then. I'll pick you up at 7. Will you be here?" She nodded. "Yes. I'll be here." When Ryan walked back to the office, his heart felt lighter, though he didn't know why. Maybe he just wanted to do something good, something kind without reason. But somewhere deep inside, curiosity burned stronger. There was something about Grace he couldn't explain, like she carried a secret too big for words. Evening came faster than expected. Ryan hurried home to change. He wore his best suit, simple but neat, and checked the mirror twice before leaving. As he walked back toward the cafe, the city lights shimmered through thin fog. When he reached the spot, Grace was already there, standing under the streetlight. She looked different. Still wearing her old coat, but something about the way she stood made her look almost royal, as if the night itself bowed around her. In her hand, she held a small purse, worn out but clean. "You look," Ryan hesitated, searching for the right word. "Nice." Grace smiled gently. "Thank you, Ryan. You look kind." He offered his arm awkwardly, and to his surprise, she took it. Together they walked toward the office building where the party was being held. The closer they got, the louder the music grew. Laughter, glasses clinking, the smell of rich food, the world Grace had once known but now entered as a stranger. When they stepped inside, every head turned. Conversation stopped for a few seconds. Ryan felt the weight of every stare. Some people whispered behind their hands, others just frowned. The receptionist's smile froze awkwardly when she saw Grace. "Good evening, Ryan," she said in a tight voice. "And your guest?" "This is Grace," Ryan said simply. "She's with me." Grace smiled politely. "Good evening." They stepped into the grand hall. The lights shimmered off crystal chandeliers. People in expensive suits and glittering dresses filled the room. Grace walked beside him with calm confidence, as if none of the stares bothered her. Ryan felt embarrassed at first, but the way she carried herself, tall, graceful, with quiet dignity, made him stand straighter too. As they passed a group of co-workers, one of them, a woman named Claire, whispered loudly, "Did he bring a homeless woman to the party?" Her friend giggled, covering her mouth. Ryan clenched his jaw, but before he could say anything, Grace turned slightly and met their gaze. "It's kind of you to notice," she said softly, her tone polite but sharp enough to silence them. The laughter stopped. Claire looked away, pretending to check her phone. Ryan blinked. Grace's voice wasn't angry, it carried authority, calm and commanding. Something about it made people listen. They found a small table near the corner. Ryan felt a little better when a waiter came over, offering them drinks. Grace accepted a glass of water, holding it gently in her hands. The music changed, and Ryan glanced at the huge portrait of the company's CEO hanging on the wall. Grace's eyes followed his gaze, and for the first time that night, something shifted in her expression. Her hand trembled slightly as she looked at the portrait. The man in the picture was older, smiling confidently, his name written in gold letters beneath it, Thomas Hale, CEO of Bluebridge Corp. Grace whispered under her breath, "He hasn't changed at all." Ryan turned to her, confused. "You know him?" Grace didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the portrait, filled with emotions too mixed to name, pain, anger, maybe sadness. Ryan didn't push her, but his heart began to pound. Something about the way she looked at that picture felt wrong, too personal. The night was only beginning, but Ryan already sensed that bringing her here would change everything. And as the music played and laughter filled the room, Grace sat quietly, her eyes still locked on the portrait of the CEO, like a storm was waiting behind her calm smile. The lights inside the grand hall shimmered like diamonds, bouncing off the polished floor and expensive glass walls. Music filled the air, soft at first, then louder as more people arrived. Everyone was dressed perfectly, men in sharp suits, women in glittering dresses, the kind of world where smiles looked expensive and conversations were practiced. Ryan stood near the side, trying to blend in. He had always hated company events like this. The laughter was too loud, the compliments too fake. But this time, it felt even worse, because all eyes were on him, or rather, on Grace. She stood beside him, calm and silent, wearing a simple gray dress that didn't belong to this glittering world. Her old coat hung loosely on her shoulders, and yet, there was something about her presence that drew attention. She didn't look nervous or ashamed. She looked peaceful. Almost powerful, in a quiet way. Ryan could feel the whispers around them. Who is she? Is he serious? He brought her here? The voices mixed with the music, becoming a sharp noise in his mind. He tried to ignore them. He reminded himself why he did this, to show her kindness, to make her feel human again. But as people stared and smirked, even he started to feel out of place. Grace, however, didn't seem to notice. She looked around the hall, her eyes observing everything, the tall windows, the golden lights, the faces full of pride and greed. When her gaze reached the far end of the room, she stopped. Her expression changed slightly, softer, sadder. Ryan followed her eyes. On the far wall hung a massive painting of the company's founder and current CEO, Thomas Hale. The same man whose face she had looked at before. Grace whispered under her breath, "He built this empire on lies." Ryan turned to her quickly. "What did you say?" She blinked and looked at him, as if waking from a memory. "Nothing. Just talking to myself." Before Ryan could ask more, a loud voice came from across the room. It was Claire, one of the marketing leads, walking toward them with two of her friends. She wore a fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, Ryan," Claire said sweetly, "you didn't tell us you'd bring such an interesting guest tonight." Ryan forced a polite smile. "This is Grace." Claire looked Grace up and down. "Grace, nice to meet you. You must be from around here?" Her tone was full of hidden insult. Grace met her eyes calmly. "No," she said softly. "I come from far away. But I know this place well." Claire raised an eyebrow. "Really? You know Bluebridge Corp?" Grace smiled faintly. "I used to know it better than anyone." The answer made Claire frown in confusion. Ryan tried to change the topic. "Grace, would you like something to eat?" Before she could reply, another voice joined them. "Ryan! My man!" It was Mr. Daniels, the HR manager, already half drunk. "Who's this lovely lady?" Ryan hesitated. "A friend." Mr. Daniels laughed loudly. "A friend, huh? Well, welcome, ma'am. Enjoy the night. And Ryan, remember, no drama, okay? The CEO's arriving soon." He walked away chuckling, leaving behind an awkward silence. Claire smirked and whispered to her friends before walking off. Ryan sighed. "I'm sorry about that. They can be cruel sometimes." Grace shook her head. "Don't be sorry for them. People often reveal who they are when they think someone is beneath them." Her words hit Ryan deeply. He looked at her, at the calmness in her eyes, the quiet dignity she carried even in front of mockery. "You're stronger than you look," he said softly. Grace turned toward him. "Strength isn't always loud, Ryan. Sometimes it's just surviving when no one helps you." Her voice had weight, the kind that came from experience. Ryan didn't know her story, but he felt it hiding behind her silence like a storm behind a mountain. The lights dimmed suddenly, and soft music started again. People began dancing. Grace's attention moved to the stage being prepared for the CEO's arrival. She looked tense now. Her hands rested on the table, fingers slightly trembling. Ryan noticed. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her eyes didn't leave the stage. "I'm fine. It's just been a long time since I've been in a place like this." A waiter approached with a tray of champagne glasses. Grace took one politely but didn't drink it. Instead, she turned her gaze toward a group of executives whispering nearby. One of them, a gray-haired man in a black suit, looked at her twice, then froze. Ryan noticed the man's reaction. He leaned closer to Grace. "Do you know him?" She didn't answer. Her expression turned unreadable again. The man quickly looked away, but his face was pale. The music grew louder. The lights changed again, now shining toward the large staircase at the front. A voice announced proudly, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the CEO of Bluebridge Corporation, Mr. Thomas Hale." Everyone began clapping. The crowd turned toward the stairs as Thomas Hale appeared, wearing a dark suit, his silver hair perfectly combed. He looked confident, powerful, every bit the man whose name carried authority across the city. Grace's hand tightened around her glass. Ryan felt her body go still. Her eyes locked on the man walking down the stairs. There was something in her gaze, anger, pain, and something else, something like heartbreak. Ryan whispered, "You're shaking. Do you want to leave?" "No," she said quietly. "Not yet." The CEO stepped onto the stage, greeting the crowd with a charming smile. "Good evening, everyone. It's wonderful to see all of you here tonight." The audience clapped again. Grace's eyes didn't move from him for a second. Ryan didn't understand what was happening, but the tension in her face was growing. "Grace," he said softly, "do you know this man?" Grace's lips curved into a faint, sad smile. "More than he remembers." Before Ryan could ask anything else, Thomas Hale's eyes swept across the room. For a moment, his confident smile faltered. His gaze stopped, directly on Grace. The microphone in his hand trembled slightly. He blinked, his face pale under the bright lights. Grace stood up slowly, her expression unreadable. The crowd began to murmur. Ryan turned toward her, whispering, "Grace, what are you doing?" She didn't answer. She just kept her eyes locked on the man on stage, her voice low but steady as she whispered, "He hasn't changed at all." The music faded. The room felt colder. Ryan's heart pounded as he realized something powerful was about to happen. Grace took a slow step forward. And for the first time that night, the laughter, the music, the fake smiles, all of it began to die away. Something told Ryan that after this moment, nothing would ever be the same again. The room fell into a strange silence. The music that had filled the hall moments ago seemed to fade into the background, replaced by soft whispers that spread like ripples through water. Every eye in the room turned toward Grace, the woman who, moments ago, had been just another face in the crowd. Now, even the CEO himself looked shaken. Ryan stood frozen beside her, not understanding what was happening. He felt the weight of dozens of curious stares, the heat of gossip starting to build around them. Claire and her friends stood near the buffet table, whispering and giggling behind their glasses of wine. "She's ruining the party," one of them said, not even trying to hide her voice. Grace seemed unaffected. She sat down again slowly, her hands folded neatly on the table, her expression calm, too calm. Ryan leaned closer. "Grace," he whispered, "what's going on? Why did the CEO look at you like that?" Her eyes stayed fixed on the stage. "Because he remembers," she said softly. "Remembers what?" Ryan asked, confused. She turned her head toward him, her eyes filled with quiet sadness. "You'll understand soon." Her voice carried a strange certainty, the kind that sent chills down Ryan's spine. At the front of the hall, the CEO, Thomas Hale, tried to continue his speech, but his words stumbled. He cleared his throat, forcing a smile. "As I was saying, tonight is a celebration of our success, of the people who make this company great." But his eyes kept flicking back toward Grace. He was distracted. Nervous. Even from across the room, Ryan could see the tension in his face. A few minutes later, the music started again, and people began to move around, pretending everything was normal. But it wasn't. The whispers had grown louder now. "Who is she? She looks familiar somehow. Why did the CEO freeze like that?" Ryan felt the air around him grow heavier. He wished the floor would open up and swallow him. He hadn't meant to cause a scene, he just wanted to help a lonely woman feel human again. Now, it felt like something far bigger was happening, something he couldn't control. A group of his coworkers passed by their table. One of them, a tall man named Eric, stopped and smirked. Ryan, my man. Didn't know you had such unusual taste. Ryan clenched his jaw. Eric, not now. Eric ignored him and looked directly at Grace. So, miss, where did you two meet? Outside a charity shelter? A few people nearby chuckled. Ryan's face burned with embarrassment. He wanted to say something, but before he could, Grace looked up at Eric, her gaze calm and steady. Outside, she said softly. But not in a shelter. Sometimes, the people inside the buildings are the ones who need saving. Eric froze, caught off guard. Grace's tone wasn't angry, it was firm, cutting, and full of quiet power. The laughter around them died instantly. Ryan stared at her. Even surrounded by judgment, she didn't lower her head. Instead, she looked like someone who had seen far worse and survived. After a moment, Eric muttered something under his breath and walked away. Ryan leaned forward. You didn't have to do that. Grace turned to him and smiled faintly. People like him don't learn unless someone reminds them what respect looks like. Her words carried wisdom and pain. She didn't sound proud, she sounded tired, like someone who had fought too many battles alone. As the night went on, more people approached Ryan's table out of curiosity. Some tried to be polite, others couldn't hide their judgment. Grace handled them all the same way, calm, kind, but never submissive. She spoke little, but when she did, every word seemed to hold weight. One woman asked her, "You seem to know Mr. Hale. Have you met before?" Grace looked at her for a moment before answering, "Yes. Once upon a time, in another life." The woman laughed awkwardly, not sure how to respond, and walked away. Ryan couldn't take the tension anymore. "Grace, please," he said quietly. "You're scaring me a little. Just tell me what's going on." Grace looked at him gently. "I can't tell you yet. You wouldn't believe me if I did." He wanted to argue, but something in her eyes stopped him. She looked so sure, so certain of what was coming. At that moment, the waiter approached their table again, offering them more drinks. Grace shook her head politely, but Ryan noticed her hand trembling slightly. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "I'm fine," she said. "Just remembering things I once tried to forget." The way she said it sent chills down his back. Then, suddenly, the hall doors opened again. The crowd turned as more executives entered, surrounding the CEO. Thomas Hale seemed unsettled, his confident smile was gone. He whispered something to a man beside him, and both of them glanced toward Grace. Ryan noticed and frowned. "They're looking at you again." Grace's expression didn't change. "Of course they are," she said quietly. "The truth always makes people uncomfortable." Before Ryan could respond, the music faded out again. Thomas Hale stepped back onto the stage, forcing a smile for the audience. "I want to take a moment," he began, his voice a little shaky, "to thank everyone who helped this company grow. You are the heart of Bluebridge." His eyes shifted once more to Grace. For a split second, his words stopped. He swallowed hard, pretending to look at the crowd. Ryan's heartbeat quickened. Whatever was happening between the two of them, it wasn't simple. There was history, deep, painful history, hiding beneath those polite smiles. Grace placed her hands flat on the table, her eyes never leaving the stage. "He's pretending well," she said softly. Ryan frowned. "Who?" "The man on the stage," she whispered. "He used to be good once. Kind. But somewhere along the way, he lost himself, and me." Ryan stared at her, his mouth slightly open. "Grace, what are you saying?" But she didn't answer. Her gaze was fixed on Thomas Hale, her face calm but her eyes full of quiet fire. The whispers in the crowd grew again. People could feel something was wrong, even if they didn't know what. The music played softly in the background, but it couldn't hide the tension crawling through the room. Grace leaned closer to Ryan, her voice barely above a whisper. Sometimes, the truth has to walk into the light by itself. Then she stood up. Ryan reached out, his heart pounding. Grace, wait. But she didn't stop. She began walking slowly toward the stage, every step drawing eyes, every motion silencing voices. And by the time she reached the center of the hall, even the music had stopped. All that remained was the sound of her footsteps, steady, calm, and full of purpose. Ryan stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. Something told him that what was about to happen next would change everything. The air in the hall was heavy with silence as Grace reached the stage. Her calm footsteps echoed through the large room, each one carrying more weight than the last. Thomas Hale, the CEO, stood frozen behind the microphone. His confident presence from earlier had vanished, his face had turned pale, and his eyes were locked on Grace as if he had just seen a ghost. Ryan couldn't move. He felt a mix of confusion and fear twisting in his stomach. What was happening? Why did Grace seem to know the CEO? And why did the CEO look like he'd just seen his past come back to life? Grace stopped just a few feet from the stage. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The room was so quiet that even the sound of the rain tapping against the windows could be heard. The guests stood still, holding their drinks, waiting for someone to say something. Thomas finally stepped away from the microphone. "You," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It can't be." Grace tilted her head slightly, her expression calm but her eyes full of emotion. "It's been a long time, Thomas." A ripple of confusion spread across the room. People exchanged glances, trying to understand what was happening. Ryan's heart pounded. He looked around, some of the guests were whispering, some recording with their phones, and others just stood frozen like statues. Thomas took a deep breath and spoke again, this time louder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said shakily, "please, give me a moment." He gestured to the band to stop playing, and the soft background music faded completely. Grace took a step closer. "You always did like making speeches," she said softly. "But you were never good at listening." Thomas looked down for a moment, guilt flashing across his face. "Grace. I thought you were gone." Her lips trembled slightly, though she quickly steadied herself. "Gone?" she repeated. "You mean forgotten." Gasps filled the room. Ryan's head spun. Grace? The CEO's wife? The thought hit him like a lightning bolt. The story she had hinted at, the sadness, the way she talked about a man who lost himself, it all made sense now. The CEO's assistant hurried toward the stage, whispering something into his ear. Thomas raised a hand to stop him. "No," he said firmly. "She deserves to speak." Grace's eyes glistened as she looked at him. "Do I? After what happened?" Thomas swallowed hard. "Please," he said, his voice cracking. "Not here. Not in front of everyone." Her voice grew stronger. "Here is exactly where it should happen." Everyone watched in stunned silence. Grace turned to face the audience. "You all know him as a great leader," she began. "A man who built this company from the ground up. But you don't know what he left behind to do it." Thomas took a step forward, his face full of pain. "Grace, stop. Please." "She didn't. He built an empire," she continued. "But he forgot the people who helped him when he had nothing. He forgot promises, love, and the simple truth that no success means anything when you destroy your heart along the way." Her words hung in the air like thunder. No one spoke. Even the servers had stopped moving. Ryan stood completely still, his heart pounding in his chest. He had brought Grace here to give her a warm night, not to start a storm that would shake the company. But now, he couldn't look away. Thomas looked broken. "I thought you were dead," he said finally, his voice shaking. "I looked for you. After the accident. Grace closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. You didn't look hard enough, she whispered. The crowd gasped again. The tension in the room was unbearable. Ryan could feel it in his bones, the kind of moment that changes everything. Thomas stepped closer to her. Grace, please, just tell me where you've been. She looked up at him, her voice trembling but firm. Where do you think? On the streets. Alone. Lost. Watching the man I loved build his dream while I tried to survive the nightmare he left behind. A sharp breath echoed through the hall. Thomas covered his mouth with his hand, his face full of disbelief and regret. No. Grace. I thought you were gone forever. She shook her head. You never thought I was gone. You just stopped looking because it was easier to move on. Thomas's eyes filled with tears. I didn't move on. I just didn't know how to live with the guilt. Grace looked at him for a long moment, then turned her eyes toward Ryan. He didn't find me, she said softly. You did. Ryan froze, unsure how to respond. The crowd turned to look at him. He wanted to disappear. I just wanted to help, he said quietly. Grace smiled weakly. And that makes you more human than most people in this room. The words hit everyone like a silent wave. People lowered their heads, ashamed of their whispers from earlier. Thomas took another step closer, his voice trembling. Grace, please. Let me make this right. She looked at him sadly. Some things can't be fixed, Thomas. But they can be faced. The room stayed silent as she turned away from the stage and began to walk back toward the exit. The crowd parted for her like water, no one daring to speak. Ryan felt an ache in his chest as he watched her go. She looked strong, but there was a deep sadness in her steps. Thomas called out, his voice breaking. Grace, wait! She stopped but didn't turn around. I waited years, she said softly. You didn't come then. Don't follow me now. And with that, she walked out of the hall, leaving behind a room full of shocked faces and one broken man. Ryan stood there, speechless. He didn't know whether he had just witnessed an ending or the beginning of something much bigger. Outside, the rain had started again, tapping softly against the glass, as if the night itself was weeping for the truth that had finally been revealed. Ryan sat at his desk, staring blankly at his computer screen. His phone buzzed every few seconds with messages from coworkers. Was it true? Did you really bring her? What was she like? He ignored them all. His mind was replaying last night over and over, Grace's calm voice, her tears, the look on Thomas Hale's face when he saw her. It all felt unreal. Suddenly, his office phone rang. He picked it up, expecting another curious employee. But instead, a deep voice said, Ryan Cooper, report to my office. Now. It was the CEO. Ryan's heart skipped. He grabbed his jacket and hurried down the hallway. As he walked, people stared, whispering behind his back. By the time he reached the executive floor, his palms were sweating. Thomas Hale was standing by the window when Ryan entered. The morning sun made his reflection look tired and older than before. There were dark circles under his eyes, and the confident energy he once carried was gone. Sit down, Thomas said quietly. Ryan obeyed. The silence between them felt heavy. After a long pause, Thomas finally spoke. You were the one who brought her here. Yes, sir, Ryan said carefully. I didn't know who she was. I just wanted to help. Thomas nodded slowly. She told me that. His voice cracked slightly. Do you know where she is now? Ryan shook his head. No. After she left, I didn't see her again. I tried to follow her, but she disappeared into the rain. Thomas sighed deeply, his shoulders slumping. I've spent years wondering if she was alive. And now, when she finally shows up, she disappears again. He walked closer to Ryan, his voice low and trembling. You saw her first. You talked to her. Maybe she trusts you. I need to find her. Ryan hesitated. Sir, she told you not to follow her. Thomas turned sharply. And what am I supposed to do? Just let her vanish again? She's my wife. His voice broke at the end, full of raw pain. Ryan looked at him, at the man who was usually so powerful, now completely broken. If you really want to find her, Ryan said softly, you'll need to listen this time. Not just look. Thomas's eyes softened, as if Ryan's words had hit something deep inside him. Then help me, he whispered. Ryan nodded slowly. I'll try. That afternoon, Ryan left the office and began walking through the city. The rain had stopped, but the streets were still wet and shiny, reflecting the gray clouds above. He retraced the places where he had first met Grace, the old cafe, the park bench, the alley where she had sat wrapped in her coat. He asked around, showing her picture from the party. Some people shook their heads, some recognized her vaguely, and one old street vendor said, I saw her this morning. She was buying flowers. Ryan thanked him and hurried toward the flower shop. When he arrived, he saw a few wilted roses left on the counter. The florist nodded when he asked. Yes, she came here. Bought white roses. Said she needed to visit someone. Did she say where she was going? Ryan asked. The woman hesitated, then pointed down the street. The old cemetery near the river. Ryan's stomach turned cold. He ran through the streets until he reached the quiet cemetery. The ground was still wet, and the air smelled of rain and soil. He walked between rows of tombstones until he saw her, standing alone, holding a small bouquet of white roses. Grace didn't turn around, but she spoke softly when he approached. You shouldn't have followed me. Ryan stopped a few feet away. The CEO sent me. He's looking for you. She smiled sadly. Of course he is. He always looks after it's too late. Ryan looked at the grave she was facing. The stone was old, the name almost faded, Emily Hale. She was our daughter, Grace said quietly. She died 10 years ago. After the accident. Ryan's chest tightened. He didn't know what to say. Grace's voice trembled. That night, Thomas and I argued. He left angry. I drove to follow him, but I lost control. Emily was in the car with me. Her voice broke. When I woke up, she was gone. And so was he. Ryan felt a lump in his throat. He said he thought you were dead. I wanted to be, Grace whispered. I couldn't face him. I couldn't face myself. So I left everything behind. I lived where no one knew my name. I thought maybe pain would fade if I disappeared. Tears slipped down her face as she placed the roses on the grave. But it never does. You just learn to carry it quietly. Ryan wanted to comfort her but didn't know how. He just stood there, silent, letting her speak. After a long moment, Grace looked up at the sky. Thomas is still chasing the same thing, success, control, power. But none of it matters. Not if you lose your soul on the way. Ryan said softly, he's changed. I think he regrets it all. She gave a small, tired smile. Regret is easy. Change is harder. Suddenly, a car pulled up near the cemetery gate. Ryan turned, it was Thomas. He ran toward them, his face pale, eyes full of tears. Grace, he shouted. Grace didn't move. When Thomas reached her, he stopped a few steps away, gasping for breath. I had to see you, he said. I needed to tell you how sorry I am. Grace looked at him quietly. You can't undo the past, Thomas. He nodded. I know. But I can try to make what's left of it right. For a moment, no one spoke. The three of them stood there, the wind softly moving through the trees, the white roses trembling on the grave. Grace finally said, If you really mean that, then stop searching for me. Start searching for yourself. She turned and began to walk away. Thomas called after her, but she didn't stop. Ryan stood between them, his heart heavy. He could see that both of them were broken, one by guilt, the other by pain, and yet, in their eyes, there was still something left. Something unfinished. As Grace disappeared down the path, Thomas whispered, I won't lose her again. Ryan sighed quietly. Then maybe this time, you'll have to find her the right way. The next morning, the city woke up to a gray sky and quiet streets. The storm had passed, but it had left behind that strange stillness that always comes after heavy rain, a silence full of unspoken things. Ryan sat by his apartment window, staring at the world outside, still thinking about what had happened at the cemetery. Grace's words kept echoing in his mind, Stop searching for me. Start searching for yourself. He couldn't shake the image of her walking away, calm yet broken, leaving Thomas standing there among the graves. There was something final in her voice, yet something unfinished too. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a message from the CEO's assistant. Mr. Hale wants to see you. Urgent. Ryan sighed. He knew it wasn't over. When he arrived at the company, the atmosphere felt tense. Employees whispered in the hallways, and the usual cheerful greetings were replaced by nervous looks. Thomas Hale's name was on everyone's lips again, but this time, not as a symbol of power. People said he had changed overnight. Ryan knocked on the office door and heard a weak voice say, Come in. Thomas sat behind his desk, his eyes red and tired. Papers were scattered everywhere, and there was an open photo frame lying face down. Sit, Thomas said quietly. Ryan did. Sir, I didn't expect. Thomas interrupted him. She's gone again. His voice broke. I went back to the cemetery this morning. She wasn't there. But she left this. He held up a white envelope. It was slightly wrinkled, the paper soft from being carried around in the rain. On the front, in gentle handwriting, it said, For Thomas, and the man who helped me remember kindness. Ryan blinked. She mentioned me? Thomas nodded. Yes. I haven't opened it yet. I couldn't. He slid the envelope across the table. We'll read it together. Ryan hesitated, then opened it carefully. Inside was a single folded letter, written in Grace's delicate handwriting. Thomas's hands trembled as Ryan began to read aloud. Thomas. I never meant for the world to see our pain. I came to that party because I wanted to see if the man I once loved still existed behind the name and the money. When I saw you, I saw both the man I lost and the man I loved, still fighting inside you. You thought I was gone, but I was always here, watching from the corners of the world you built. I didn't come to destroy your image, I came to remind you of who you used to be. There was a time when you said kindness mattered more than profit. Do you remember that? That's the man I married. That's the man who promised our daughter the world. I forgive you, Thomas. But forgiveness doesn't mean return. It means I'm letting go of the pain so we can both live again. Don't look for me. Look for yourself. Find the man who built this company with hope, not ambition. Build something that would make Emily proud. And Ryan, thank you. You showed me that goodness still exists in quiet corners of the world. You helped me remember what humanity feels like. Keep that heart safe. The world needs more people like you. Grace. The room fell silent. Thomas stared at the letter as if the words were glowing on the paper. His hands were shaking, his breathing shallow. "I killed everything good between us," he whispered finally. "And she still forgave me." Ryan folded the letter carefully and placed it on the desk. "Sometimes forgiveness isn't about who deserves it," he said softly. "It's about who needs peace." Thomas leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes. "I don't deserve peace." "Maybe not yet," Ryan said. "But she gave you a chance to earn it." For the first time, Thomas didn't argue. He just nodded slowly, tears slipping down his cheeks. After a long pause, Thomas looked up. "She mentioned you by name," he said quietly. "You made her believe in kindness again. Maybe you can help me do the same." Ryan hesitated. "Sir, I'm not." Thomas cut him off gently. "You are. You're exactly the kind of person this company needs. Not just another employee, a reminder of what we've lost." He stood, walking to the window. "I've spent years chasing power, Ryan. And in one night, a homeless woman, my wife, reminded me that power means nothing without heart." Ryan didn't know what to say. Thomas turned back toward him, his expression softer now. "I'm starting a new division," he said. "A program to help people like Grace, people who lost everything but never gave up. I want you to lead it." Ryan's eyes widened. "Me?" "Yes, you," Thomas said with a faint smile. "She saw something in you." "I think I do too." Ryan nodded slowly, overwhelmed. "I'll do it," he said quietly. Thomas looked down at the letter again, touching the paper as if it were something sacred. "Grace always believed in second chances," he whispered. "Maybe this is mine." That evening, Ryan left the office feeling heavy but hopeful. The city lights flickered against the dark sky, and the air smelled of rain again. He walked past the same cafe where he had first met Grace, half expecting to see her sitting there, but the chair was empty. Still, somehow, it didn't feel like she was gone. As he walked away, he noticed something small taped to the cafe door, a white flower, fresh and delicate, with a note beneath it. It read, "Keep believing in kindness." Ryan smiled faintly. He knew who had left it. And somewhere in the city, hidden among quiet streets and fading lights, Grace watched from a distance, finally at peace, knowing her message had reached the hearts that needed it most. The change started quietly, almost unnoticed. The first thing Thomas Hale did was cancel a huge luxury event and donate the money to rebuild a women's shelter in the city. He named it Emily's Haven, after his late daughter. The next step was launching a new project, Graceworks, an employment and housing program for the homeless. And the man leading it all was Ryan Cooper. Every morning, Ryan arrived early, carrying the same simple energy that had brought Grace into his life. He didn't dress fancy or speak like an executive. He listened. He helped. He smiled. And slowly, others followed his example. Employees who had once laughed at the homeless woman now volunteered on weekends. They handed out food, helped families find jobs, and spent time with people society had forgotten. It was as if Grace's quiet spirit still walked through the hallways, whispering kindness into everyone's hearts. One afternoon, Thomas called Ryan into his office. The man who had once looked powerful and untouchable now looked calm, older, wiser, and finally at peace. "How's the program running?" he asked. Ryan smiled. "Better than we ever imagined. We've already placed 30 people in new jobs. Some of them were sleeping under bridges just a month ago." Thomas nodded, his eyes glistening. She would have loved that. There was a short silence. Then Thomas added, "Every night, I still think about her. About Grace. About Emily. About everything I should have done differently." Ryan said softly, "She didn't want you to live in regret. She wanted you to live with purpose." Thomas smiled faintly. "You sound like her." Ryan chuckled quietly. Maybe she left a little bit of herself with both of us. Thomas nodded, looking out the window. Maybe she did. A few days later, Ryan was reviewing some reports when one of the volunteers came running in, holding an envelope. "Mr. Cooper," she said, "this came in the mail today. No return address." Ryan frowned. The envelope was plain, slightly weathered, but there was something familiar about the handwriting. He opened it carefully. Inside was a single note written in graceful script. "Dear Ryan, keep going. What you're doing matters more than you know. You helped me believe again, not just in people, but in healing. Wherever I am, I carry your kindness with me. G." Ryan read it twice, his throat tightening. "Grace." He looked up at the volunteer, smiling faintly. "It's from someone who taught me what hope really means." Later that day, he took the letter to Thomas. When the CEO read it, he didn't speak for a long time. Then he looked at Ryan and said quietly, "She's still watching." Ryan nodded. She never really left. Months passed, and Graceworks expanded across cities. The company grew, not just in profits, but in reputation. News outlets began calling it the company that found its soul. During the anniversary event that year, Thomas stood on the same stage where Grace had once confronted him. But this time, his voice was steady, his tone warm. "Last year," he began, "I stood here as a man lost in his own success. I thought winning meant never falling. But I learned that true success is found in how we lift others. Tonight, we honor the woman who reminded me of that truth, Grace Hale." The hall fell silent. A large portrait of Grace appeared on the screen, smiling, gentle, full of life. The crowd stood in quiet respect. Thomas turned to Ryan, who was standing by the side of the stage. "And we honor the man who showed me that kindness still exists. Ryan, this is your legacy as much as hers." The crowd applauded, but Ryan wasn't thinking about the fame or the praise. His mind was somewhere else, in that rainy street where it had all begun. After the ceremony, Ryan stepped outside. The air was cool and fresh, with a light drizzle falling again. Across the street, under a glowing streetlight, he thought he saw a familiar figure, a woman in a simple gray coat, her hair tucked beneath a scarf. For a moment, his heart stopped. Grace? She didn't move. She just smiled softly and nodded, as if to say thank you. Then, as a car passed by, she was gone. Ryan stood there, the rain soaking his shoulders, but his heart felt warm. He didn't chase her. He didn't need to. Because this time, he understood, Grace was never meant to stay. She was meant to remind them all of something bigger, that even one act of kindness can change countless lives. The next morning, Ryan placed the letter Grace had written inside a glass frame and hung it on the wall of Graceworks' main office. Beneath it, he added a small plaque that read, "In memory of Grace Hale, who taught us that kindness is the greatest success." People who walked past often stopped to read it. Some smiled. Some cried. But every one of them left with something different in their hearts, hope. And in that quiet moment, as sunlight poured through the window, it almost felt like Grace was there, smiling, not from sorrow anymore, but from peace.